What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Amulet Titan deck for Modern, and it's been a deck that I know that I've sung its praises, and on the Casual Spikes podcast, which you should totally check out after you're done watching this video, we talked about how good the Amulet Titan deck is, but the barrier to entry seems very, very high. So today, in our quest to chronicle, the current tier 1 decks of the format, I think Amulet Titan kind of rounds out that spot of, being towards like the bottom of tier 1 to tier 1.5, solely based on complexity of the deck, and the fact that like you really can't pick it up. So we're going to go over it, and hopefully I can kind of explain why it is very complicated, because I think it's a deck that you can learn some of the basics, but then, when one thing goes even slightly wrong, you have to kind of adjust on the fly and figure out different decisions and things like that. So, of course, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos like this and other content, please consider subscribing, ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. Check out the Casual Spikes podcast. It gets posted on Saturdays. We're going to miss an episode this weekend because Randy is going to the RC in Denver. So, while there won't be an episode then, we will definitely have one the next week, kind of talking about the RC, how we did with RC Ghent that took place about 2 weeks ago now. And of course, go to the description if you want to check out the deck list. Deck list will be linked in the description, and the Discord server link will be there as well. Go over there and join as well. So, Amulet Titan is a weird deck, and the name is straightforward, but everything else about the deck is weird. So, you have this card, Amulet of Vigor, which says whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped, enters the battlefield tapped, and under your control, untap it. I never realized how weird the wording is for it. So essentially, whenever something comes into play tapped under your control, you get to untap it. So with an amulet, you are trying to abuse it as much as possible. And so you're thinking, like, how can you abuse something like Amulet of Vigor? Like, it should be unabusable. Well, you have the Karoo lands, the bounce lands, whatever you want to call them, from the original Ravnica set, where they come into play tapped. They force you to return a land you control to its owner's hand when they enter the battlefield, and then they tap to add 2 mana of their respective guild's color. So Simic Growth Chamber is a green-blue. You have the Gruul Turf, which is green-red. You have Golgari Rot Farm, green-black, and so on. The point of this is that you can kind of mitigate the downside of these bounce lands. So they come into play untapped, and you can immediately tap them for 2 mana. Okay, so how exactly can we abuse this? You're only generating 2 mana. Well, if you have multiple amulets in play, you actually get multiple untaps of the same permanent, even if one amulet trigger untapped that permanent. So you play Simic Growth Chamber, and you have 2 Amulet of Vigors in play. Simic Growth Chamber can generate 4 mana, and then bounce itself to its owner's hand, which is actually kind of what the deck wants to do. It always wants to keep 1 or 2 bounce lands in hand, ready to go to play as land drops, because they just generate so much more mana when you play them as a land for turn, rather than actually leaving them on the battlefield. So what are we going to do? So you're making tons of mana. It's not totally out of the realm of possibility between Amulet of Vigor and, playing 4 Urza Sagas and then playing 3 Michelson's Garden, that you have multiple amulets in play. So we've established that we can generate a ton of mana. How the heck are we going to abuse it? What are we going to spend it on? There's this card called Primeval Titan. There's a Cycle of Titans printed, I think is M11, M12, and by far this one is the best one, continues to be the best one. There is no debate. This is probably the best Titan from the cycle, and is basically what has made this deck, relevant for almost the entirety of Modern's existence since about 2012. 2011, 2012, I guess, technically being the start of Modern. But, this deck has always been around. It just keeps kicking, keeps fighting. And it's mainly because of those 2 cards. But obviously, Primeval Titan, Prime Time, the big show, 6/6 for 6 mana, trample, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may search your library for up to 2 lane cards. You put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. The keyword being tapped, because if you have an amulet in play, we get to continue to abuse amulet things. So in some of these other lists, they kind of bounce between like Boros Garrison, Slayer Stronghold. Slayer Stronghold can, for a red and a white, and tapping it, can give target creature +2/+0 and Vigilance Haste until end of turn, so you're able to attack with the Titan. This one opts to go for the, I just saw it, Hanweir Battlements, which pays for a red, and tapping it, you can give target creature haste, so you're able to kind of go get maybe a Crumbling Vestige. This will, in a way, generate 2 mana, giving you a colorless on untap, and then a colored mana when it enters the battlefield. You can end up going and getting a Valakut as well. Any ways that you can generate red mana, you can give the Hanweir Battlements, use the Hanweir Battlements to give the Primeval Titan haste. Then you can attack with the Primeval Titan, and then you have some options from there. If you have multiple amulets in play, on the attack, it's a little bit worse getting Tolaria West Simic Growth Chamber or Tolaria West not Bounce Land. Typically, you might be going for something like Urza Saga, maybe even more Valakuts or Vesuvas to go copy more Bounce Lands, and kind of going from there. You could also end up getting a Kessig Wolf run and just generating a ton of damage. Again, we talked about having multiple amulets in play, multiple ways to make multiple land drops. Dryad kind of plays this two-way street of getting to give you an additional land drop, but then also giving your lands every basic land type, so Valakut can actually produce lethal, and the many different ways that you can do math with the Valakut deck. Cultivator Colossus is kind of a way that you can generate a ton of card advantage. It's a 7 mana for a Star Trample. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. If you play this card and you have no lands in play, if you just have a bounce land generating a ton of mana, this will die when it enters the battlefield, but you still get the trigger. So when it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card, repeat this process. Essentially, you can keep playing lands until you turn all your lands into spells. With any amount of lands in play, and you have a Dryad, with how many lands this deck plays, I think it plays 32, there is a possibility that you play a Cultivator Colossus. You can just end up playing enough lands to kill your opponent with 1 and especially 2 Valakuts in play. With a Dryad, this card is just nuts, because even if for some reason you don't have lethal and you just put 15, 20 lands into play, Cultivator Colossus is still a 20 power trampler. And of course, in combination with Kessig Wolf Run, you don't need the trample, but the fact that you just give it +X+O, and just again kind of give more damage than your opponent can actually handle killing them. With the addition of Kessig Wolf Run as well, your Arboreal Grazer can technically get in there and kill your opponent, even though it doesn't have any power, and it feels like it should be more of a defender. It just has reach, so you can actually attack with this and produce lethal. The fact that it also puts a land into play tapped lets you kind of do some kind of nuttier things on turn 2, or even on turn 1, where you just want to put one of your bounce lands into play. You're able to play one of your untapped lands, play the Grazer, and then play a bounce land and return the other land to your hand. That just sets you up a little bit better for some other turn 2 plays. You have Summoner's Pact kind of to increase the count of Primeval Titan and Cultivator Colossus in your deck. We talked about Tolaria West. You can transmute it to get a 0-cost card from your deck, which means that you can go get a Summoner's Pact to go get a Primeval Titan or a Cultivator Colossus. You can even get Dryad Arbor or Dryad of the Elysian Grove and Arboreal Grazer to kind of smooth things out if you just need a little bit of extra mana, or if you're trying to win with a Valakut, you can go and get yourself a Dryad. Explorer is another way that you can make additional land drops, and it gets to draw a card as well. Again, when you're trying to make an explosive amount of mana, any extra land drops are good, especially if you have an amulet. You're able to kind of make the Explorer cheaper. With 2 amulets, you generate 4 mana, play an Explorer, you have 2 mana, play a bounce land, you have 6 mana, you have Primeval Titan mana right there. The 4 Amulet Vigor we talked about. One of Expedition Maps is a target that you can get with Urza Saga. You can end up searching for a bounce land in a pinch to end up generating, again, a ton of mana to do something else. And of course, this deck wouldn't be complete without the One Ring. While definitely not abusing the One Ring like other decks are, where they're trying to untap it and activate it multiple times, have it stick around on the battlefield, and do certain things. I mean, this deck is kind of doing busted things with the One Ring in the fact of, just getting to get the protection from it, kind of stall out for a turn. Sometimes this deck just needs a little bit of time, and this is going to, give you that turn, plus drawing you 3 extra cards, plus your draw step, and again, we're playing 4 Summoners Pact, 4 Primeval Titan, 2 Talaria West. There are plenty of things that we could be waiting on when playing this deck to eventually get to that turn where we Primeval Titan, haste it up, and then, try to kill our opponent with, like, Valakut. I think this version in particular is more in on the, Valakut kill plan than it is just kind of playing some good utility lands, possibly even just winning the game outright with Primeval Titan. Again, I've seen some versions that are still playing the Boros Garrison Slayer Stronghold, which is like another way to give Titan haste and vigilance so he can play offense and defense. Attack into them, and then you even have like the Slayer Stronghold or the Boros Garrison. Oh, goodness. There's a land that gives them double strike, and it is not in this list. It looks like going for Kessig Wolfrun. Mirror Pool's interesting because it adds a colorless mana. It's not interesting because of that. You can sacrifice a copy an instant or sorcery spell you control, choose new targets for the copy, or you can pay 5 and sacrifice it and create a token that's a copy of a creature you control, which means that you can copy a Primeval Titan, you can copy a Cultivator Colossus, and just kind of do some crazy things. You can also copy a Dryad, so then that way you're kind of like protected in a way if your opponent tries to remove your Dryad of the Elysian Grove and you end up getting a ton of Valakut triggers. You can just Mirror Pool to make a copy of it, and your opponent has to have 2 removal spells for it. Of course, I'm sure the dream being, you just hit like a Primeval Titan or a Cultivator Colossus with it, and then just kind of game over, all she wrote from there. Sideboard, you have Radiant Fountain for the more aggressive decks. It's nothing to, have multiple land drops. You play a Fountain, bounce to your hand, then play it again. You just gain like 4 life from just playing lands. You have a Stomping Ground. I actually did see a video where if someone had a Breeding Pool in their deck instead of like a basic land, they could have still transmuted a Talaria West to go get a Summoner's Pact to still go get a Titan and cast Titan. I'm assuming that like the Stomping Grounds like sort of kind of like the same idea. Obviously this isn't going to help transmute Talaria West, but I think just if someone besieges your bounce land, which is a super real thing, and you have like a ton of amulets in play, like Stomping Ground is still a way that you can generate a bunch of green mana if you need to, and then of course still activate Hanweir Battlements as well to give your Cultivator Colossus haste. Or your Primeval Titan haste, the more important one. Defense Grid for the control decks. Bone Crusher Giant, because it's just a good card. And you prevent damage. This is like way that you can kind of like push through the One Ring. Which I'm kind of surprised that it's not playing like Wild Slash just because it is cheaper. But I guess Bone Crusher gives you a little bit more utility like in the, the more grindier games. You have Dismember, 2 Fire Spouts, which you can easily do both halves of. Essentially just dealing 3 damage to everything. I guess with the added bonus of like you can just only do it to flyers, so you could kind of just tag, Dragon Rage Channelers that might be a little bit delirious. Storm's Wrath, 4 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Again, you're not really, you're killing your Dryad with this, but chances are you're kind of able to play around it. Generous End is kind of crazy because I'm assuming it's just a big body that you can like cycle later to go get like a forest from your deck. This deck is playing absolutely 0 of them. No, 3 of them. Okay, I'm not crazy. So you can probably just cycle this to go get like a forest. You can go get your Stomping Ground. Trumpeting Carnosaur. Discover 5. I'm assuming just kind of, it hits like everything in the deck besides like Primeval Titan, Cultivator Colossus. And you're probably pretty happy with like any of the stuff that it can hit. It's kind of like a starter. Plus, it's like a removal spell on a card as well. So that is the Amulet Titan deck for the modern format. Overall, again, this deck is pretty complicated. I did point out the, playing a Titan, you go and, give it haste and you attack and do some things. But there's going to be times, a non-zero amount of times where you draw Hanweir Battlements and, you got to kind of figure out how to reroute from there. Maybe there's times where your opponent is going to, after you Summoner's Pact and you go get a Titan and you try to give it haste, then your opponent, taps your Titan and, the game's just over from there. You kind of have to be mindful of, like, what your opponent's doing. Even though this deck has the potential of just absolutely running your opponent over and, you just, like, end up playing a Dryad, like, on turn 2, and then turn 3, you generate a ton of mana, and you get to play a Primeval Titan, and you just put a ton of lands into play, and you kill your opponent from there. It's totally possible that can happen with any combination of, like, these 3 cards here, plus Amulet of Vigor. Like, the more amulets you have, the better. Obviously, just getting a ton of lands and, having them be every land type and getting Valakut, super easy. You can run your opponent over. But definitely having, like, the routing and the idea that, like, if my opponent interacts with us in the wrong way, and maybe I Summoner's Pacted, then I need to figure out a different way to fetch with my Primeval Titans. Notably, too, I don't see make sure I visually confirm it, there's no Cavern of Souls anywhere in the 75, which is pretty crazy given the fact that, you know, I don't think necessarily Rhinos is going to interact with you on that way. I mean, they can, but it wouldn't be enough of a reason, I think, for me to play Cavern. But the fact that there is no Cavern of Souls here, when usually it was like 2 or 3 copies, seemed mandatory. Like 1 in the main, 2 in the sideboard, 2 main, 1 side, you know, what have you. Definitely interesting to see. But overall, you know, this deck is pretty complicated. The main lines, I think, are pretty easy. I think everyone's kind of explored it and understands it. The idea and like trying to think of like how much, like generating the most possible mana that you can, getting the most possible value from your Titans and stuff is the hard part. And I think it's a deck where a lot of the time when you play other decks, I think it's easy to see when you have like the nuts. You have the Stone Cold nuts, and with Amulet Titan, I think it's a little bit, you know, you can tell when you have it, but it always just seems like, oh, there's like a little bit more that you could do to make it even more optimal, to kind of give you that other, like, you know, few percentage that you need to kind of make it like inevitable, rather than kind of giving your opponent like a window and stuff. And that just happens when a deck is 1 part complicated, 2 parts like sort of unfriendly for the most part to like new players trying to pick it up. This deck takes a lot of practice. But yeah, that's the Amulet Titan deck. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like on the video if you did enjoy. Comment down below what modern deck you would like to see next. Check out the Casual Spikes podcast, going up every Saturday, except for this Saturday. But we have a few episodes out if you want to go check those out. You know, check out the deck list in the link in the description down below, and then the Discord server as well with the link in the description as well. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.